on Unsolved Mysteries. In the ashes of a garage fire, police find the body of Clarence Roberts. And then, 10 years later, another fire kills his wife, and the body of Clarence Roberts is found again. How can one man die twice? Few people know that Elvis Presley had a twin brother who died at birth. Some believe that the tragic loss inspired Elvis to greatness. The heartbreaking death of a 6-year-old girl remains a mystery that her family and friends still want to solve. And police in California need your help to track down a doctor who sexually assaulted his trusting patients. Murder, missing persons, wanted fugitives, and the paranormal. I'm Dennis Farina, and this is Unsolved Mysteries. In Nashville, Indiana, two of the most respected residents were Clarence and Geneva Roberts. That is, until they became the center of a local controversy. A tangled mystery of lies and deception. One winter night, a fire raged out of control behind the Roberts' home. When the ashes cooled, firefighters discovered a body. It was soon identified as Clarence Roberts. 10 years later, there was another fire. 2 more bodies were discovered. The first was Geneva Roberts. The second was none other than Clarence Roberts. How could the same man die twice? It was just one more question about the mysterious Clarence Roberts.
I talked to both detectives that was on the second fire, and from what they told me, I'd say it was definitely Clarence.
I still think Clarence died in the first fire. I don't think Clarence Roberts died in the second fire. I just don't believe that.
I think Clarence is still alive. I sure do.
People in Nashville are still wondering about Clarence Roberts. He was a businessman, a former sheriff, and a board member of the local bank. It was hard to imagine anyone more successful. And yet, somewhere along the way, a different side of Clarence Roberts began to emerge. Before his troubles began, Clarence owned a thriving hardware store with his brother, Carson.
He and I worked together for about 22 years. Clarence always seemed to be pretty happy. He enjoyed working. Clarence was outgoing, he was friendly, and always made friends with people, and always got along with people.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Clarence and his wife, Geneva, had been married 20 years. Geneva came from a poor family, but together, she and Clarence made a good life for themselves. Then, Clarence began spending money, more money than he had. He purchased 3 luxury cars and a home he could not afford. To finance his extravagant lifestyle, Clarence sold the hardware store and put everything he had into real estate investments. Those ventures failed, and Clarence found himself in serious financial trouble.
For all the money that he was losing, everything going down the drain, he was going for a millionaire or broke, and he was ending up broke. He was trying to pull out of it.
Finally, even Clarence and Geneva's cars were repossessed. They were deeply in debt with nowhere to turn.
He wasn't the Clarence that I had always been used to being around. He was down. He was really depressed, and I feel that he was suicidal.
And then, the fire. 1 month after the Roberts cars were taken, firefighters arrived to discover the garage of their home engulfed in flames. The heat was so intense that they can only stand by helplessly while the structure burned to the ground. Once the fire had cooled, they made a gruesome discovery.
Chief, come back here. I think we got a body.
A body in the ashes was burned beyond recognition. A half-melted shotgun by its side. The coroner feared that Clarence had finally escaped his deaths by taking his own life.
We thought he'd shot himself. There wasn't much doubt in our minds that he just got too many worries ahead of him and he'd committed suicide. So when we got back down to the funeral home, we started looking for shots. And we couldn't find any.
Questions began to surface. The coroner wondered how Clarence could have taken his own life without firing a single shot. When Detective Don Custer carefully sifted through the ashes, he found a ring that had belonged to Clarence. Despite the intense heat, the ring was not damaged.
There's no way that ring could have withstood the heat of that fire like it did and not even have a damaged part on it at all. I definitely think the ring was a plant. It had to be.
It was the first of many clues suggesting the fire was not what it seemed. Police learned that a few months before the fire, Clarence had taken out several life insurance policies totaling close to $1 million. A test of the body found in the ashes showed type AB blood. Clarence had type B blood. If it wasn't the body of Clarence Roberts, then who was it? Eyewitnesses provide a possible answer. Just 2 days before the blaze, Clarence had been spotted in a bar buying drinks for a homeless man. According to the eyewitnesses, as he and Clarence were leaving the bar, the drifter passed out and collapsed.
Clarence said he'd take him to the hospital, and Clarence left with him. And later on, I checked the hospitals within a 300-mile radius, and this man was not admitted to a hospital.
Now, there were two theories about Clarence. One scenario was that he had killed himself. The other, that Clarence Roberts had murdered the transient, then staged his own fiery death in order to collect the insurance money.
Suicidal? Yes. But to commit murder? No way. I can't believe he could have been any part of that. It must be hard, be beyond my wildest imagination to think that Clarence Roberts could ever have been involved with anything like that.
Definitely. Definitely, he was capable of it.
Clarence was either dead or missing, and Geneva was definitely alone. With no money and no Clarence, she was forced to move back to the wrong side of the tracks. Her claims to the insurance money were denied. The financial setbacks took their toll on Geneva. She avoided her friends and neighbors, eventually becoming the target of local gossip. Shopkeepers said that Geneva began buying a lot of beer. That was surprising, as she was a diabetic and almost never drank beer. Reports began to surface that someone else was hanging around Geneva's house.
We had developed information that a man had been seen behind Geneva's residence. The man acted very strangely. He would never let anyone get close to him, and he always seemed to duck away from them and head back toward the house immediately. I'm sure that was probably Clarence. I think he had perhaps run out of places to go, you know, and he had come back to staying with Geneva. He was the mysterious man that was seen behind her house.
Geneva was able to keep the identity of the mysterious man a secret, at least until the night of the second fire.
When my office called and explained that it was Geneva's house on fire and that they thought Geneva was still inside the house, I went right to the fire scene, and the fire was still burning, very intensely at that time. After the fire was extinguished, why, we just stayed behind, and I'm not even sure why. I just wanted to look further.
Sifting through the ashes, searchers found the charred body of Geneva Roberts. Hours later, they made another startling discovery.
Geneva's body had been removed to the funeral home, and the fire had been extinguished. The house was totally demolished. So we'd gone through the rubble, and a fireman had located a second body in another part of the house. And I was just so certain that it would be that of Clarence.
I recognized him immediately by his chest x-ray. Now I knew that I was going to have a difficult time to tell all of my friends and neighbors in the world that Clarence was dead for the second time.
It just turned out to be Clarence, and I was very pleased with that, that this might be coming to an end. Little did I know that it was just starting.
It looks like someone just came in the back door and poured all the way around the walls.
The second fire was a clear-cut case of arson.
We could follow very clearly these burn patterns from Geneva's bed into the adjacent room where Clarence's body was located, and then down a hallway and out the back door of that house. So we determined right there that at least Geneva had been murdered. We're sure that turpentine was used to ignite this fire. We know that. We simply don't know who started it, whether it was Clarence that started the fire or that of a third party. I subscribe to the theory of a third party.
Police have no clue as to who set the second fire, but they believe they have identified the second victim.
So I'm absolutely convinced that the second victim, the victim in the second fire, is that of Clarence Roberts. There's just no doubt in my mind. There's not a doubt in my mind at all.
I'm absolutely convinced that Clarence Roberts died in the second fire, and that some person, possibly a derelict, died in the first fire. And when I say absolutely, I mean that this is not only a reasonable medical certainty, but would be beyond a shadow of a doubt.
The mystery of Clarence Roberts lies buried in this small cemetery in Nashville, Indiana. But the questions remain. Who was the man in the first fire? Who set the second fire and why? And the key questions, where is Clarence Roberts? And is he even buried in his own grave? Police believe that there is someone who knows the truth about Clarence and Geneva Roberts. If you have any information about this case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Next, few people know that Elvis Presley had a twin brother who died at birth. Some believe that his twin inspired his legendary fame. Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. His life story is a classic. A shy teenager from the wrong side of town becomes a superstar. But what few people know about Elvis is that he was haunted his entire life by the death of his twin brother, Jesse Guerin. Elvis was born in this shack in East Tupelo, Mississippi. Records show that his twin brother was born first, more than a half hour before Elvis. But by the time Elvis was born, Jesse Guerin Presley had already been declared dead. Jesse was buried in an unmarked grave in this nearby cemetery. Today, many believe his death had profound emotional consequences for Elvis. Some say that it was the driving force behind both his creative genius and his self-destruction.
When Elvis was a child, 5, 6 years old, he used to tell me that he used to hear a voice inside of his head, and it used to confuse him, and it used to scare him a little bit, and he was afraid to mention it to anyone. He thought perhaps it was his brother Jesse communicating to him, telling him what to do.
Music was Elvis's way of communicating with Jesse. The two had been bonded before they were born intrauterинely with the rhythm and the voice of the Fundamentalist Assembly of God Church, a very important cornerstone for understanding Elvis.
Dr. Peter Whitmer has devoted years to studying the psychology of twins, especially those who have been separated by death. The surviving child is often referred to as a twinless twin.
Many twinless twins, including Elvis, tend to become, shall we say, superstitious. Elvis would look to his twin for signs of guidance, for signs of strength. Elvis also felt that Jesse was his compass, was a sign of direction, that Elvis should, in fact, do great things. That had the two of them been united, they would have been able to do great things. That they were separated, Elvis alone had to be the creator, the perfectionist.
There are more than 500,000 twinless twins in the world today. Like Elvis Presley, they're united by a common but unusual bond, a strange belief that the spirit of the dead twin lives on.
I do feel the presence of someone else in my life. It's only been recently that I've thought to put it in that framework of the twin. I've thought of it more as a guardian angel or a spiritual presence.
For some of us,
Dr. Raymond Brandt coined the term twinless twin and founded a nationwide support group for them.
Twins are unique because there's one thing that a twin, a multiple, has that single birth people do not, and that's called uteral bonding. Of course, today with ultrasounds and studying behaviors in utero, we realize that they hug and what appears to be kissing and even perhaps slugging or pushing at each other. We understand and accept today that uteral bonding begins at the moment of conception.
Consider the case of Deanne Seitz. Born an identical twin, Deanne became twinless when her sister Shannon died just 5 hours after birth.
She may have died 22 years ago, but I can feel her presence all the time. Shannon's my guardian angel. She watches over me. You know, she kind of makes sure nothing really bad happens to me or my family.
Deanne says that while she was on her way to work, she had a dramatic psychic experience with her lost twin. Deanne believes her sister saved her life.
It was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was going down the off-ramp, and this feeling came over me. I could feel Shannon's presence really strong next to me. And then, almost like her presence came over me and had me pull over to the right and then stop. And then not even 5 seconds later, Shannon was telling me to pull over before I got hit. It wasn't as if she said, you know, hello, I'm here. It's just the feeling, the security of her being around.
Because my twin died in the womb, I lived and she died. There's a sense that I've carried with me forever that somehow I took too much. For example, I must have eaten all the food, or, you know, I was the one who lived. And I carried a deep sense of guilt about being here.
Not until we
That's the downside, the guilt. Many people believe it is guilt that drives twinless twins to great heights or the depths of self-destruction. Some say the root cause of Elvis Presley's emotional torment was his sadness and feeling of responsibility for his twin brother's death. Elvis's friend, Larry Geller, recalls a conversation that took place a year before Elvis died.
He said, man, I had a dream the other night. I can't get it out of my head, I gotta tell you. There I was with my twin brother, Jesse. He had the same hairstyle, the sideburns, the same eyes. One spotlight on him, one spotlight on me. But Larry, the strangest thing, I started to feel guilty. I felt like I did something wrong, and I don't know why. It's the weirdest feeling. And I said, well, maybe it's kind of simple. You lived and he didn't.
Elvis never was able to resolve his psychological angst over the death of Jesse. It was something that was at the core of all of his behavior. From my perspective, his substance abuse, his self-abuse in general, his working himself to death, was the desire to reunite with Jesse.
I remember one time we were talking, and he was telling me about his mother. He used to question her about his twin brother, Jesse Guerin. And she said to him, Elvis, God took your twin brother back home to heaven, and someday we'll all be together again. And Elvis said to me, Lawrence, I believe that. We're all going home someday. I'm going to be with my twin brother again.
For now, medical science cannot explain the psychic connections of twinless twins. And though some might think they lead troubled lives, the twins themselves believe that they have been gifted. Next, the search for a young woman who disappeared near a lake in Alabama. Lake Guntersville, Alabama, early morning.
Wanda?
Betty Dorman tries to wake up her 26-year-old niece, Wanda Jean Mays.
Wanda? Wanda?
But Wanda doesn't answer. Betty calls her grandson John for help.
Get out of the way.
Wanda's uncle ran down to the lake and saw a piece of clothing on the dock. It was Wanda's torn and bloody nightgown. His first thought was that Wanda had fallen into the water and drowned. The Alabama State Rescue Squad began dragging the lake, searching for clues or a body. They found nothing.
We're gonna go out there and
Wanda's parents couldn't do anything but wait.
I never thought for a minute Wanda was in the water. Wanda is an excellent swimmer and a survivor. She's always been a survivor.
Within a few hours, the rescue squad found an abandoned canoe and towed it to shore. Inside were traces of blood.
After seeing the blood in the boat, I knew that she was alone and hurt and needed medical attention. The thing that you feel inside when you have the possibility of losing a daughter is indescribable. I can never be the same until I know what happened to Wanda.
Homicide investigators were called in. Detective Ed Teal took charge of the investigation.
When we arrived, we examined the canoe. Blood samples taken from that. All this blood was sent to the lab and came back to being her type of blood.
Looks like a little blood stain in this canoe.
This is the most mysterious case that I've ever worked. I've never worked a case in 10 years where someone just vanished. When I came into the room, I noticed that the bed, the cover had been turned back, but no one had ever slept in the bed. Appearance of what was identified as her clothing was lying in a chair. Her purse, her identification, checkbooks, rings, watch, everything was laying on the nightstand. I got to looking at the wall here, the glass that was broke out. There are 2 panes of glass that was broken. The thing that baffles me the most about this is that no one in the house heard the breaking of the glass or the beating of the Venetian blinds. That's a lot of racket.
More than a few questions remained unanswered. How could Wanda's aunt and uncle have slept through the sound of the window being broken? If Wanda was the victim of foul play, why was the bedroom window broken from the inside? Why would Wanda take off her nightgown and leave it on the dock? And why were there bloodstains in the canoe? There were no answers, and Wanda Jean Mays herself seemed to have vanished into the Alabama night. exact date.
18 years after Wanda disappeared, the remains of a body were discovered in a remote area 2 miles from the lake. We're sad to say they were Wanda Jean's. However, there were no signs of foul play, and police now believe that Wanda was disoriented by the darkness and fell to her death in the rocky terrain. The case is now closed.
Next, a 6-year-old girl is found dead less than a block from her house. What happened to Catherine Korzilius? Austin, Texas. At the age of 6, Catherine Korzilius seemed to be leading a charmed life. She lived in a good neighborhood with her loving parents, Nancy and Paul, and her brother Chris. Her father was personal manager for rock star John Bon Jovi. When Catherine played her first piano recital, no one imagined that she would never live to see the first grade. Her untimely death would be memorialized by family friend John Bon Jovi. August 7th, 4:15. That's when Nancy and Paul's world came crashing down. It was Paul's birthday. He was working at his office in New York City. Nancy and the kids had spent the day running errands around Austin, picking out gifts for him.
It was very quiet here in our neighborhood, as it usually is. In fact, I can remark that it was exceptionally quiet that day.
On the way home, they stopped to pick up the mail. It was a ritual Catherine looked forward to. Nancy knew what would happen next.
Mommy, may I walk home?
Sure. I'll see you when you get there.
Okay.
It was Catherine's way of saying that she was a big girl.
I allowed Catherine to do that because I knew she was ready to be more independent, and she had done it before.
Nancy and Chris drove home one way, while Catherine walked home in the opposite direction, the shorter way home. The Korzilius family lives here on Elders Circle. The community mailboxes are located here. Nancy and Chris drove home in this direction. Catherine apparently followed this route.
Both of my children had walked home together and separately from the mailboxes. It's a short walk, probably less than a quarter of a mile. When Chris and I got home, we unloaded our car and started putting our packages away.
Mom? What? Catherine's not back.
Well, she probably just stopped somewhere along the way. Go back up on the road to see if you can find her.
All right.
He came back in just a very short period of time, a few minutes, and he was crying, and he said, "She's not there, Mom." We got in the car and drove right next door to our neighbors. I ran down the steps to their front door, knocked on the door. Their son answered.
Hi, is Catherine here?
No, ma'am.
She hasn't been by here at all?
I believe at that moment, Chris and I knew that something terrible had happened.
Minutes later, Nancy would find out just how terrible.
Tell that she was unconscious, but she was breathing, and I knew it was too hot to leave her on the pavement. I know that it's never a good idea to move somebody if you don't know what their injuries are, but I just couldn't leave her there, and I think having driven her to the emergency before, knowing the way very well, I felt confident that I was able to drive that drive.
Catherine suffered a fractured skull. She never regained consciousness.
Catherine was on a ventilator to keep her breathing, but she was brain dead. It wasn't a matter of her being in a coma or being unconscious. Her brain had died.
I arranged for a charter aircraft so that I could come directly home, but in the end it was too late anyway. I arrived at 12:30 in the morning, and I believe she was pronounced dead at 11:30 that night, an hour before my arrival.
From the start, everyone just assumed that Catherine had been the victim of a hit-and-run driver. However, as police searched for the suspect, other disturbing theories began to surface.
Catherine left her mother's car here and headed in this direction. Less than 10 minutes later, she was found here, on the opposite side of the circle, half a mile away. The medical examiner's report only deepened the mystery. He determined that Catherine had not died from a hit-and-run accident.
The injuries that Catherine sustained could have been the result of either jumping from a moving vehicle, being thrown from a moving vehicle, or falling from a moving vehicle. The type of injuries that we expect in these circumstances would have been the same.
If Catherine did tumble from a moving vehicle, whose vehicle was it? And was she pushed, or did she fall?
One of the theories that investigators proposed was that indeed somehow Catherine had jumped on the back of our vehicle without Nancy's knowledge, and as the vehicle drove around the Elder Circle, she had fallen off, which was a way to explain where she was found in Elder Circle, which is completely opposite of where she would have been on her normal route.
The Korzilius family was stunned. Was it possible that Nancy was responsible for her daughter's death? Paul and Nancy hired their own private investigator, Barbara O'Brien. She found the scenario hard to believe.
Hot August day, this whole car would have been very, very hot. There's only one place to hold on to all the way up here. And the door is the only other place down here to hold on to, and it opens when you get a hold of it. She also had a broken left thumb, and she had a splint on her thumb. So it would have been extremely difficult for her to get a hold on anything. And her mother would have seen her in the rearview mirror.
The Korzilius family has their own theory. They believe their daughter was abducted and murdered. A search of a vacant, overgrown lot just 30 yards from the mailboxes may have provided a crucial clue.
A few days after Catherine's death, the investigators did bring in the canine unit and search the area. They did pick up her scent over in this vacant lot, which would indicate that she was coming in this direction from the mailboxes, taking the most direct route home. The scent was lost, however, which tells us that this may have been the point where she was abducted or the injury took place, but she was then later moved where she was found by her mother.
She looked like she'd been laid out there for me to find. Her hair was smoothed down. Her shirt was straight. Her shorts were straight. Her toes were pointed straight. Her sandals were on. I know someone moved her, and I know someone laid her there for me to find.
After all the investigations and speculation, the cause of Catherine's death remains a mystery. In the quiet neighborhood on Elder Circle, her memory lives on. Catherine's neighbors have planted a tree and placed a plaque in her name.
I think if Paul and Nancy's parents knew how it happened, perhaps it could help them with the closure of this tragic event. Nothing that anyone can say or do is ever going to bring their daughter back to them. But it's twice as hard not knowing what happened.
I think of families of people who are missing in action. Well, they're not here, but what happened to them? And that's exactly, to a certain extent, how I feel about our daughter. I had Catherine's body, but something happened in the last 15 minutes of her life that I don't know what that was.
The investigation into Catherine's death has ground to a halt. If you have any information that might help resolve this case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Next, a family doctor is on the run, charged with the brutal rape of a patient. San Diego, California.
Hi.
We will call this young woman Patricia. When she was 19 years old, Patricia went to a clinic complaining of flu symptoms.
You know what? If you just take a seat, it'll just be a few minutes.
Patricia had no way of knowing that the doctor who was about to see her had recently been forced to resign from another clinic. 4 different complaints of sexual misconduct had been filed against him, each by a young woman in her 20s. The doctor's name was Arvind Sinha. The California State Medical Board ruled that Sinha could keep his license because there were no witnesses to the assaults. It was the patient's word against the doctor's.
Dr. Sinha right now.
Dr. Sinha.
Hi.
He kept asking me questions about family, about having a boyfriend, and I was really sick. I had a fever, I wasn't feeling well. This combined with all the questioning, it really just threw me off. You know, I just figured that he was just trying to be more helpful and caring.
Patricia says that once the nurse left, Dr. Sinha's examination quickly became a sexual assault.
He manipulated me into a position where I couldn't even see what he was doing. And I didn't even know what he was doing or trying to do until I'd finally realized that he had raped me. After he had left the room, I just started crying. I knew what had happened, but I just could not believe that that had happened to me.
I'm okay.
Patricia was afraid to let anyone at the clinic know what happened. A short time later, Patricia's parents took her to another hospital and local police were notified. After a week-long investigation, Arvind was arrested.
He had no reaction. He kept repeating after I told him what she was alleging. He said, "Oh, how interesting." And throughout the interview, he repeated, "How interesting." No emotion, no reaction, just... he said he didn't do it, that he might have been framed, but I would have expected a little reaction out of an innocent person.
The next day, Arvind posted a $175,000 bail. Within a month, he had disappeared. Later, his medical license was revoked by the state of California.
Every woman he's around is in danger. He's not going to stop. He had 4 warnings and lost a job, and then he came back and raped Patricia. He's not going to stop.
The only 2 places I really felt safe was at church or at the doctor's office, you know. And now, you know, I don't have that trust for anybody anywhere.
Arvind Sinha is 5 feet 6 inches tall with dark hair and dark eyes. He graduated from medical school in his native India and completed his residency in Dayton, Ohio.
Authorities believe that Arvind Sinha is still working in the medical profession somewhere in the United States, possibly in a small town. He is wanted on 13 counts of rape and 3 counts of sexual battery. If you have any information that could help lead to his arrest, please log on to our website at unsolved.com.
Daytona, Florida. Teenagers have a reputation for being moody, but by all accounts, the case of 19-year-old Tim Molnar was extreme. Without warning, Tim simply drove away from home one day and out of his family's life.
Tim was a rather quiet, sensitive type of a person, but he was always very polite and well-mannered, and he was doing well in school, was on the dean's list, in fact, and he was a very likable person.
On the day Tim left, his parents grew more and more frightened with each passing hour. His 14-year-old brother, Frank, had been the last family member to see Tim.
Said to have a nice day.
There's a pretty good age difference between us, but we still hung out a lot because, you know, we got along real good and pretty open relationship, and I could just tell something was bothering him. Why he wasn't really saying, it seemed like there was a lot going on in his mind.
2 weeks passed with no word from Tim. The Molnar's first clue came from a gas station in Lake City, Florida, 150 miles north. On the day he disappeared, Tim paid for a tank of gas with his parents' credit card. The attendant recalled that Tim had been traveling alone. But traveling where? His family could only guess until they received a notice from a car impound yard in Georgia.
That is Tim's car.
The Molnars learned that 6 days after Tim left home, his car was found abandoned in a parking lot just a block from the Atlanta bus terminal.
When we went to inspect the car, we did find his driver's license and wallet and some identification and our credit card, which indicated to me that he changed his identity. And in other words, he wanted to start a new life from there on.
I worried mostly about foul play and was afraid that something happened to him because we have no proof that he drove his car from Lake City, Florida, to Atlanta.
Tim Molnar left behind a tangle of conflicting clues. On one hand, he didn't take any clothes with him. Perhaps he had never really intended to stay away. And yet, just before leaving, Tim withdrew nearly all the money from his savings account. He did, however, leave a balance of $10, as though to say he might someday return.
I mean, no matter where he is or what he's up to, it'd be great to see him and just, tell him we miss him and, kind of curious why he left, what have you. I'm sure, I don't know what the circumstances were, but, it'd be great to see him.
Update. When this story first aired, a viewer recognized the clothing that Tim was wearing when he disappeared. 10 years earlier, the viewer had discovered a body in the woods near Merton, Wisconsin, with similar clothing. DNA tests confirmed that the body was that of Tim Molnar. Police have no idea what Tim was doing in Wisconsin or how he died. If you have any information about the death of Tim Molnar, please log on to our website at Unsolved.